Hey, hello everyone. Welcome. If you have any questions for this evening, please feel free to include it in the chat. Very quickly, I am going to go straight into the PowerPoint presentation, and I will totally not be on the camera at all, so you won't have to worry about looking at me. And everyone should come in without a camera and should come in muted this evening. So I'm happy to get started as soon as everyone is here. And we are ready to go. We have about another minute left, so I am going to start getting the presentation room ready. Hey, how's it going? All right. All right. Hey, Brandon, if you have any questions this evening, just put them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer those. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to let me know. All right. Still waiting on a few people to show. Actually, we've got quite a few supposed to be here now. Okay. So we only have 45 minutes, Brandon, on this platform. So within the next 2 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. Really appreciate everyone being here. And we are going to switch into presentation mode in just a second. Okay, if you will do me a favor, and Brandon, can you see the, hey Omar, can you guys see the presentation? PowerPoint is up. Awesome, perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So I am the only one who is technically going to be on the video. However, because I want everyone to get the fullness of the presentation, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my video as well. And all we're going to have is the presentation. So if you have any questions, please include that in the chat box. I'm happy to get to those as they come through, and really appreciate everyone being here. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started here with the first slide on defining depression. And defining depression, first of all, the first basic idea of depression are feelings of severe despondency and dejection. Now, that's not considered clinical depression. That's considered the basic feeling of being down, despondency and dejection. That's pretty typical. Most people have that feeling at some point in their lives. And that's not something that necessarily needs to be a concern for anyone. However, that should be something that we also know that this tool, these tools that we're learning this evening are ways of addressing that as well. So we want to make sure that everyone is aware of that. So you can handle everyday normal feelings of depression, anxiety, and stress with these, as well as being able to treat clinical depression, which is the second definition that we're going to talk about here. And that is a mental health disorder characterized by persistently depressed mood or loss of interest in activities causing significant impairment in daily life. Now, what that means is that this has become clinical because it is, hey, Jen, glad to have you here. We are only on the first slide, so welcome. And we are just now covering what depression is so that we can know how to address it and how to deal with it. If you have any questions this evening, please go ahead and include those in the group chat box, and I'm happy to answer those questions as they come through, as I see them. So in the purpose of defining these terms is that by establishing linguistic frames of reference, and all that means is by clearly articulating what we are discussing. we are discussing depression. And by clearly articulating it and defining it, we're able to know exactly what types of feelings we're to use when addressing this with these techniques. We know specifically when to use them. So this is concerning depression. So we can better assess whether a client, acquaintance, or even we ourselves are experiencing some variation or degree of depression. Does anybody have any questions about that? Everybody good? We'll just go ahead and carry on. I'll assume that there are no questions on each slide unless somebody goes ahead and includes them in the chat. So I'll go ahead and carry on as if everybody's on the same page. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the idea of mapping our emotions through tactile sensations. Now, tactile sensations are equivalent to whenever you rub your hand across a smooth surface and that feels smooth to you. That is identical to the heaviness that someone might feel in their chest whenever they're feeling depressed or down. To them and to your brain, there is no difference between those tactile sensations. So when we're mapping these emotions, it's important for us to clearly be able to articulate the feelings, the tactile sensations that we have that correspond with an emotion. And one of the fastest and best ways to be able to experiment with this is by thinking about a time when you were very, very happy and connecting with the last time you felt truly excited and really happy about your life. And think about that. And as you think about that, think about how that makes you feel. Are there any sensations that correspond with the feeling of a positive emotional state? And that's usually the easiest way, although I will tell you that people have a tendency to feel negative emotions, to feel those tactile sensations much more intensely and much more clearly. They're usually able to articulate when they feel that in their chest or in their head, in their back, in their stomach. They're normally able to articulate that. Some people even say like there's a cold chill in their feet. I mean, there's all sorts of things that go along with that. But one of the NLP techniques that is used to help someone rapidly break out of a negative emotional state is a pattern interrupt. And a pattern interrupt is anything that takes someone from a feedback loop where they're feeding themselves the same emotion. That could even be joy or excitement, but you interrupt that pattern with a new emotion, a new sensation, a new idea or concept. By mapping the client's emotional state, we can define only the sensations correlating to that specific emotional state. And once both patterns are mapped, a positive emotion, that's the indication of the plus sign there, and the negative emotion, that's the indication of the negative sign there in the red. Once we have clearly mapped the negative emotion that we no longer want to feel and how those feelings kind of whirl and move in our body, and once we clearly articulate how we want to feel and the positive emotions and how that's going to feel and how that sensation moves throughout our body, then we can map those across using either the have-want technique that I'll be teaching you this evening or kinesthetic mapping across. They both rely on strategic questions. These are mostly about knowing how to ask questions that elicit the right response. Okay. Let's go ahead and identify a positive emotion and a negative emotion. And these are to get kinesthetic representations. So when identifying joy, we look for certain things in the eyes. Now, this is considered sensory acuity, when you are able to learn through emotional intelligence how to spot when somebody is experiencing joy and how to spot when someone is experiencing anger. The reason I picked these two emotions is because they're kind of stark differences from one another, and they also don't coincide with the topic this evening, so that you can kind of see them, get an idea of them, and not actually have to go into either one of those states. So when someone is experiencing joy, we see the muscle around the eyes tighten, crow's feet quite often, so you see wrinkles on the ends of the eyes. The cheeks lift, that's the zygomatic major, the major muscle in the cheeks. And then the lip corners are raised diagonally, and meaning towards the outsides of the room rather than, any other variation of that. When someone's experiencing anger, we can see that typically by the eyebrows being pulled down, the upper eyelids being pulled up, the lower eyelids being pulled up, and the margins of the lips rolled in, and the lips may even be tightened. These are pretty good illustrations so that you can see that. I want you to think about some of the tactile sensations that would be going through the person on the left, the one who is experiencing joy. I want you to think about what it would feel like to be experiencing joy like that. How would the tactile sensations run through her body? Do you think that maybe there's like an energy that feels like a ball of excitement in her chest? Does it feel like she's light, like she could fly or float? What are some of the tactile sensations that she might associate and map along with that state of joy? And also anger. If someone's experiencing anger, how does that feel in the body? When you feel angry, do your cheeks get hot? Does your face get red? What are there? And is that from a heat sensation? Is there some sort of feeling of the hair standing up on the back of your head or your neck? All of these are tactile sensations that could occur and be associated with anger. Now, the reason we're doing this is in order to be able to, once we get one emotion and we get it mapped, then we can get the other emotion and we can map those across and get the person to break that pattern by constantly implementing that new sensation with their own mind. And once we extract it from them, it's easier for us to implement that mapping across technique. All right, so we're going to move on to the next study. And if anybody wants this, where I extracted this from, this is from a government actual study that was done, and the website is just below the picture there. If anybody wants to take a screenshot of that or write that down, you can actually look at this study that was done. And this was based upon people's feedback on just whether or not they experienced hot or cold. And this was a study where they took I think it was 300 people. I'll have to look at it across genders, races, and age groups. And what they did was they showed that when we have different emotions, we report different sensations of temperature in the body. And these were the results of these studies, is that this was the most consistent patterns. So emotions coordinate our behavior and physiological states during survival, salient events, and pleasurable interactions. Even though we are often consciously aware of our current emotional state, such as anger or joy, the mechanisms giving rise to these subjective sensations have remained unresolved. This is a topographical self-report tool that has revealed different emotional states that are associated with topographically distinct and culturally universal bodily sensations. So these are literally what people say that they have experienced, and they've taken these and they've been able to diagram these. So this is these feelings, these tactile sensations, although every person may not experience the same identical sensation, every person does report that they do experience some form of tactile sensation in the body when they are in an emotional state. Is everybody good with this so far? Any questions on this slide? Okay, we're going to go to the next one. Fantastic. Setting a positive emotional state. The most important part of being able to utilize this technique and being able to utilize this in general for anyone is by knowing how to set a positive emotional state first. Imagine or recall a time in your life when you were truly proud of yourself. Maybe you had accomplished something great or achieved a goal of some sort, and I want you to think now about how that felt. No matter what the intensity is, do your best. Once you get an idea of how it felt, whenever you felt really proud of yourself in that moment, I want you to think about that. And regardless of the intensity, I want you to do your best now to see if you can increase that intensity. Just a little bit. Imagine if you were just to take a remote control and turn it up. Turn up the intensity a bit. Imagine you had a dial on a television, like the old dial, and just crank it up just a little bit and see if you can increase that intensity. Take a moment now, and I want you to really connect with that. Think about a moment in your life when you were really proud of yourself. when you really had accomplished something, and then just try to crank it up. Try to crank it up a notch and try to feel it a little more intensely. And what this is an exercise in you realizing intentionally that you're capable of altering your emotional states and the intensity that you feel them whenever you are actually capable of mapping them out and you connect to those feelings, you can control them. And that in and of itself a lot of times is enough to give that person enough cognitive understanding of their own emotions to where sometimes just setting that state and allowing that person to be able to control the intensity allows that person to connect with the fact that, oh, I am in control of this feeling, this emotion. I can actually lessen the intensity that I'm feeling of the negative feeling. Once they realize that they can increase the positive emotion and connect with that, then it's as easy for them to mitigate or kind of scale down that negative emotion. So that's really what we want to connect with in that exercise. Any questions there before we go on to the next one? Okay, now for this next portion, I want to make sure that anyone who has ever been diagnosed with clinical depression, this step right here, don't do this portion of the exercise along with the group. I want you to just kind of observe how you think somebody else would feel, okay? I want you to really consider that and really take it in. And as you consider it now, I want you to think about how you want to feel. So if you've ever been diagnosed with any type of depression or clinical depression, I want you to take a moment and think about how you want to feel instead during this portion. Okay? So don't attempt this portion of the exercise just yet if you've been diagnosed with clinical depression or any related diagnosis. Just observe and take notes of physiological changes in others as you try to take them through this when you feel comfortable. And then if you do feel comfortable, it's okay to practice this a little bit yourself. Now imagine a time you felt ashamed. Think about how it feels in your body to feel shame. Sometimes some people associate this with guilt. If you ever stole gum, lied, cheated at cards, cut somebody off in traffic, this might be the correct state that you were trying to recall. And I want you to really connect with that and think about how that feels. Think about the difference in the way that tactile sensation moves through your body as opposed to that other feeling, that positive feeling, that proud moment. But I want you, instead of before how we took that positive emotion and we turned up the intensity and we cranked it up, I want you to do the opposite with this one, and I want you to turn it down. I want you to lower that feeling, make it less. Make it less of a sensation. Don't worry so much about what it was that caused the feeling. That's not so much what we're thinking about. We're thinking about just the feeling. And then just crank it down. Crank it down and make it kind of lessen. But really feel it. Feel how shame or guilt and how that feels. And what you just did was a pattern interrupt. You interrupted yourself from feeling that positive feeling where you were proud of yourself to then implementing a negative feeling where you were ashamed and you felt guilty about something. Now stop it. Stop. Shake it off. No, really. Shake it off. Shake off that feeling because there's no reason to stay in it once you've mapped it. Once you know what it is, get out of it. It's fine that you did it. It's fine that you felt it. And it's fine now to move on from it. So just let it go. Forget about that sensation. Let yourself come back to a place of balance and peace and just centered, just neutral, feeling just totally content. And recall that time now when you were totally proud of yourself again. Remember, we just felt it. Proud of your behavior, your intellect, your drive. No matter what it was, consider that feeling now and embrace how it feels in your body to experience pride in yourself and what you have accomplished. Now, if you are capable of doing that now and you're really connecting with that feeling and you can really feel it, that pride, that of your behavior, your intellect, your drive, no matter what it is, but I want you to embrace it. And if you feel that now, crank that up, turn it up, increase the intensity on that, and you just experienced a full limbic system pattern interruption where we went from a positive state to a negative state back to the positive state. And what this does is it starts to condition the mind to break that pattern unconsciously. The next time that you start to feel it, your brain now has a pattern to follow to get out of that state. It now has a sequence that it has actually experienced, has mapped it out, and you have clearly defined and articulated to yourself that feeling, that sensation. And now that you know it, your brain will not forget it. And you will have much easier times from now on breaking that pattern yourself, or helping others break that pattern by literally taking them from that negative state to the positive state, to the negative state, to the positive state, and making them connect finally with that positive state, and letting them leave with that positivity, leaving on that high note and connecting more and more with that. And the brain will condition itself to do that on its own. Are there any questions that go along with that? I know Brandon had stated that because he was on his phone, he was incapable of sending a group chat. I would definitely want to make sure that if we answer any questions. So Brandon, I went ahead and unmuted your mic. Was there anything that you wanted to add or any question you wanted to ask?
Not yet.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much for the feedback. So, okay, if there is any questions and you guys can't get a hold of me, shoot me a text, send me a Facebook message, whatever, we'll get it working. No worries there. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the 4 stages of the learning process. And the reason why we're getting into this right now is because it is imperative that you understand why these techniques work. So as you read over these 4 stages, every day we're all introduced to concepts that we've never heard of, and therefore we cannot have any cognitive ability to comprehend those things. So the first stage that we're in as humans concerning anything is total ignorance. That's where we don't know what we don't know, and that's called unconscious incompetence. Okay, the second stage is being aware of our ignorance concerning a subject, and that's called conscious incompetence. We don't know well what we just discovered. We know it, but we don't know it well. So that's conscious incompetence. The third stage is where most people stop learning. They're entirely satisfied typically when they get to the third stage of the learning process, and that's normally where people lose their passion concerning a topic and they kind of move on. And that's conscious competence, and that means with great effort, we are acquiring and executing the skill, regardless of what it is. And so that you could equate that to whenever you were first learning how to drive a car. This is whenever you were still having to remind yourself to check your side mirrors and check your rear view mirror and things of that nature, but you were doing it. Your parents would allow you to take the car on your own. You were capable of doing it, but you still are having to think about it, and it's still in the forefront of your mind. Unconscious competence is when we have mastered the skill and we don't actually require that much cognition to execute it. And that's where we are driving a car now, and we've got women able to put on eyeliner and lipstick, talk on the phone and drink a cup of coffee and eat a donut while they're driving. And they could probably get in my vehicle and do the same exact thing without any problem whatsoever. So that is the point whenever you have mastered the skill, and you're probably even practicing some unsafe practices because you're so good at it that you're not concerned about it. And this is the place where our negative and positive emotional states live. And they are in our unconscious competence. We've already learned how to produce our negative and positive emotional states. It doesn't require any effort. We don't have to think about it. We just arrive there. All of a sudden, we're there. We know how to do it. We don't even think about it. So in order for us to break that, we have to be able to introduce it to our brains in a new way. And that's why we do it in the pattern interrupt, so that our brains learn the new way and adapt to it, accept it, and embrace it, because it makes us feel better. We don't have as much emotional pain whenever we have a solution. And once the brain has experienced that, by doing a kinesthetic mapping across, which is what we did with that original pattern interrupt, the brain is able to latch on to that methodology and apply it much more quickly. But remember, there's 4 stages. So even though you are introduced to this new method, it's going to take some time and some practice before it becomes second nature or instinctual. Any questions on the 4 stages of the learning process? Okay, the reason we learn. Okay, so this diagram on the right-hand side here is of a human brain. And the areas of the brain that are lit up, I don't know if you guys can really see it well on your devices or on your screen, but there's 3 different colors that are highlighted in 2 areas. And one is red, one is green, and one is yellow. And where the red is circled is what part of the brain that lights up whenever you are actually performing a behavior, when you're doing the action yourself. That red part of your brain lights up. That where the red is. Now, if you are witnessing the action, seeing someone do it, that's the green portion. It's almost as big as the red portion, not quite, but almost. And then even if you're hearing about the action, almost the same exact amount is lit up as the green portion when you're actually seeing the action. So what happens when we experience a physical action? Well, mirror neurons are activated. They produce empathy so that we're able to actually relate to what that other person is feeling when we're witnessing a behavior. Skill building through mimicry, and then vicarious experience. We can relate to the experiences of others whenever they start to tell us about them, when they start to describe them, and that's because of this area of the brain that lights up. The reason that we use this method is because, as you can see here, this purple area of the brain right here is called the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for our emotions and aggression. Remember that? See that little purple area right there on the brain that's lit up? Let's go back to that screen and look. Look at that, right there, the amygdala. That's what lights up on both sides, right and left hemisphere, whenever you're performing the action, witnessing the action, or hearing about the action. The amygdala lights up, okay? Then we've got our hippocampus. Hippocampus runs right here. Learning and memory. What lights up whenever we're hearing about performing, witnessing, and experience? Oh, that's right. There it is, the hippocampus. So that is why the combination of hearing, witnessing, or performing an experience actually helps us learn better. And that's why we use visualization in talking about how we want to feel and setting those emotional states and using positive imagery to connect the client or ourselves with the outcome that we actually want instead of the outcome that we're experiencing. And this is why this works, is the structure of the limbic system. Does anyone have any questions on that? There was a lot of information there, so totally okay to take a second and hover here for just a minute. All right, cool. All right, so now we're going to talk about inducing the pattern. So this isn't a difficult concept, but you guys remember just a few minutes ago whenever I told you if you've been diagnosed with clinical depression or anything of that nature, I didn't want you to actually try the experiment where you felt shame and guilt and all of that. Well, as a life coach, as an NLP practitioner, a lot of times as a mental health care therapist, it's important to get an idea of the emotional state, the negative emotional state, if you're wanting to map it. Not if you're wanting, you don't have to actually have them relive the experience, but if you're wanting to map it, then you need to have some idea of how this feels to them. And it may seem kind of callous that we have to actually get them to feel it, but they do need to feel the experience because it's part of that learning process. The emotions, it has to get activated for you to actually learn it. So we as people who want to help and help others heal, though, we don't really enjoy inducing pain to anyone ever. And that's a valid point. And that's why we need to see this as a learning technique using the model of the 4 stages of the learning process. We are aiming at positive emotional resolution rather than an inducing of negative emotional states. Okay? So obviously professional discretion is inferred, and each person has to determine if this is a viable option for them or a client. So you need to be really good at knowing the difference from inducing pain, inducing the past experience, and mapping tactile sensations. There's a big difference. I don't need to know anything about your experience in order for me to ask you how it feels in your body. And that there's a big difference there, okay? So a client experiencing depression, as has been defined for this workshop, is experiencing a sensation, okay? They are having feelings in their body. But that's also coincided with their cognition to them that this is as real as touching a brick wall. And it's demonstrated in that diagram that we showed when mapping sensations to emotions. Once that emotional state, that depressive state is started, it is very difficult to break because our negative emotional states often create feedback loops, and that this fuels the pattern and keeps it going, okay? So it's important for me to talk about inducing the pattern, that it is part of what we have to do. We have to get that person to experience that negative emotion, but that's so we can break it, okay? The next intention is that we don't leave them there. We break it with that positive emotion, that positive tactile sensation, and we make sure that we don't leave them in that state, but we need them to feel it so that we can retrain the brain and give the brain a new pattern to follow so that it doesn't keep following into that old pattern. Okay, breaking patterns. This is my favorite part, guys. This is where we actually get to do the technique. So, mapping across in the have-want technique. Because this cycle is based upon experiential data and not logic, and I'm talking about the emotional state, it's sometimes easiest to break by activating the limbic system in a new way that is comforting or soothing to our brains by shifting subtly to a positive emotional state. Now, I do this by using the have-want technique. And if anybody wants to go to my website, jamespesch.com, about down the middle of the screen, you can subscribe to my newsletter and you will get a free video where you can actually follow the have-want technique with me, and I'll walk you through it, okay? And if if that one doesn't work, the kinesthetic mapping across that we just talked about, where you get them to activate that tactile sensation for the positive emotional state, and then you get them to connect with the tactile sensations for the negative emotional state, and then you switch them back. That's called kinesthetic mapping across, okay? And here is a script, all right? Here is a script for you to follow if you're ever wanting to utilize this for someone else, for a colleague, for a client, or even for yourself. Because setting states concerning the desired outcomes and the tactile sensations are the easiest way to map those patterns. So we use the script to elicit those emotions and then break the pattern. So first, set the positive emotional state. I do that using predicate nominative words that are imagine, visualize, remember, recall. Anything like that works really well as that first word because it activates that visual cortex. You want them thinking about it and seeing it vividly in their mind. So imagine a positive, peaceful, or calm and relaxed feeling you enjoy feeling. Like many others, you already know how to feel relaxed, and you can do so now. So the first thing you want to do is get them to describe that. This is the best part of this experience, is really getting them to connect with it. How does that feel in your body? Does it feel like, is it a ball of energy? Is it like waves? Do you feel like light and breezy? Do you feel like that you're light as a feather and you could float? What does that feel like in your body as it radiates and moves? How does it move? Does it move clockwise, counterclockwise? Is it big? Is it small? Is it in a concentrated area? Is it on does it feel like it's on the inside of your body, or does it feel like it's on the outside of your body? These are all really just questions asking for clarification on the sensation that they're feeling internally. And the more questions that you ask, the more real it becomes and the more real it is to them in that moment. Now, the next question to ask is, how intense is this feeling for you on a scale from 1 to 10? Would you be willing to describe any sensations in your body that you can feel which correlate to this feeling? Describe that sensation's geography, movement, or intensity. And these are all ways of asking those questions. Describing that sensation's geography, movement, or intensity may seem vague. So a lot of times that's why I introduced does it feel like a ball of energy? Does it feel like waves? Does it move throughout your body? I'm giving ideas of what I mean about geography, about movement, about intensity, but I want them to start to elicit the words themselves and start to paint me a picture of how it feels to them. And then I'm going to start feeding those words back to them and to myself. If I'm writing this down on a piece of paper and I'm describing this to myself, I'm going to draw it. I'm going to draw the way it feels like it's moving through my body. I'm going to write out the sensation and how it feels and how intense it is on a scale from 1 to 10. This can work for you, or it can work for someone else. Okay, now practice some of your own ways to connect to your client, connect your client to a positive emotional state, or yourself. Remember, we can use this on ourselves by mapping the sensations right now. So if anytime you want to do this, I highly encourage you to take a moment and connect with this. Anybody who is here this evening, by the way, I am going to upload this video, and I will give everyone a link so that you can rewatch this. So don't feel too frustrated like you're having to take down notes or anything. So now we're going to talk about the have-want technique. And the have-want technique is my invention, but it is based off of neurolinguistic programming pattern interrupts. So the have-want technique, this is the script. This is what it looks like. These are basic questions. What we do is we go down the left side of the screen first, and we talk about what are you experiencing that you no longer want, okay? This is in their words. So we really want their words, whatever it is. And if they could get it in one word, that's even better. So if they could call it anxiety or stress or depression or whatever, if they can get it into one word, that's easiest to work with. But I'm okay with a sentence as long as we can then start to get it down and start to really focus on whatever the exact problem is. So once we get it down, what it is, what are you experiencing that you no longer want? Then we have to ask the next question, which is basically what's wrong with that? What's the problem with the problem? So what's wrong with feeling that way for you? Because remember, it's not our job to tell them that what they're feeling is a bad or a good thing. They're coming to us telling us that this is a feeling I no longer want. So that to them means that they don't like this feeling. So that's fine. But why is this a problem for you? I'm not saying it would be a problem for me or anyone else. Why is this a problem for you? And then it's really important for us to ask why. Why is this a problem? How is this affecting you negatively? And then finally, what will be the outcome if nothing changes? And this sometimes can go really heavy. I mean sometimes you hear all sorts of dark outcomes, but the more that this person is opposed to the actual outcome, the ultimate what's going to happen if nothing changes, the more opposed the person is, whether it's ourselves or whether it's someone else, to that outcome is going to be a huge indication on how ready they are to change, okay? So that's whenever we move straight across. So we're going to do a pattern interrupt now, and we're going to shake that off, and we're going to go, okay, shake that off. What's the opposite of that? Everything you just described. What do you want instead of what you have been experiencing? Positively stated. Because remember, oftentimes you're going to hear back at this particular moment, you're going to get back, well, I don't want to be depressed anymore, or I don't want to have anxiety anymore. That's not helpful. We need it stated positively. I would like to be happy. I would like to be content. I'd like to be full of energy and full of life. All of those are positively stated. Well, why is it important to feel this way? What would change for you if this happened? Really important to get both of those. Why is it important to you to feel this way? What would change for you if this happened? You want them to start to visualize, connect with that outcome. How would your life change if when you left here, this change had occurred? So right here in real time, what if you walk out of here and it's totally different? Typically at the moment we end right there, the person's completely set free and ready to move on. They visualized clearly. The brain's been set free from that emotional pattern of negativity. They've fully fleshed it out. They've articulated what's wrong with the problem, why it's a problem, what's going to happen if they continue down this path. They've clearly articulated what they want instead, why that's a good thing, why that would matter for their life, and how their life would change. And they've visualized it. They've connected with it. They've activated mirror neurons. The amygdala is activated. The limbic system and the hippocampus region are activated, and this becomes a learning experience that's solidified in the emotional center of the brain. It becomes a subconscious belief that's now driving their behavior instead of being an experience that they've just been living. All right, guys, that's it. Overcoming depression. This is going to be similar to a webinar that Neil and I will be conducting. That's actually going to be worth 1.5 CEUs. It's going to be extended. It'll be double this length, and obviously there will be a lot more illustrations and handouts. But I really appreciate everyone for being here this evening. Reach out to me if you have any questions. We're about out of time here on this, so if you do have any questions, just shoot me an email, and I will be uploading this as soon as possible. So thank you guys so much for being here. And I am unmuting anyone. If anyone has anything they want to add, I have unmuted everyone. We have 1:40 left for questions.
Thank you, James. Thank you for this.
No problem, man. I'm glad you were here.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good evening. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, James.
Thanks.